She was ringing up a stranger's groceries when the woman's phone slid off the conveyor belt and landed face up on the floor between them. Audrey picked it up without thinking. That was her job. Keep things moving, keep things smooth, keep the line from backing up into the cereal aisle. She handed it back with a small smile, and the woman, 40s, tired eyes, a toddler on her hip, glanced at the screen before tucking it into her pocket. But Audrey had already seen it. One name. 3 letters. A small blue heart next to it. The name her mother had whispered over her the day she was born. The name stitched inside every winter coat she'd ever owned. The name she still heard in her sleep sometimes, in the voice of the man who had raised her, her father's name. The toddler reached up and patted the woman's cheek, and the woman kissed his fingers without looking up. And Audrey kept scanning groceries. Pasta, olive oil, a box of animal crackers. And her hands did not shake and her voice did not change. And she said the total out loud in the same flat professional tone she always used. And the woman paid and left. And the next customer stepped forward. Audrey finished her shift. She did not say a word to anyone. Her name was Audrey Marsh. She was 34 years old. She had grown up in a 2-bedroom house in Denton, Ohio, with a father who coached her youth soccer team and a mother who died of breast cancer when Audrey was 11. After that, it had been just the 2 of them. Audrey and her father, Thomas Marsh, a structural engineer who packed her lunches and came to every school play and called her every Sunday for as long as she could remember. He had remarried when Audrey was 26. A woman named Beverly, quiet and careful, who made excellent pie and never tried to be Audrey's mother, which Audrey had always quietly appreciated. Beverly had 2 grown sons from her first marriage. The blended family was awkward at the edges but functional, and Thomas seemed genuinely happy for the first time in a long time, and that had been enough for Audrey. She had moved to Portland 6 years ago for her boyfriend at the time, who became her ex-boyfriend within a year, and stayed because she loved the rain and the calmies and the mountains visible from the bridge on clear mornings. She worked as a shift supervisor at a grocery store while she finished her paralegal certification at night. It wasn't glamorous, it was steady, and she was building towards something, one careful step at a time. Her father called every Sunday. He asked about her certification progress and whether she was eating enough vegetables and if she'd met anyone worth knowing. She hadn't, not yet, but she was in no rush. She'd watched enough people marry the wrong person to understand that patience was not the same thing as settling. She lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment with a small balcony where she grew tomatoes in the summer. She liked her life. It was quiet and mostly hers, and then the phone slid off the conveyor belt. For 3 days, she told herself she was being irrational. There were thousands of men named Thomas in the country. Tens of thousands, probably. The name was common. The blue heart meant nothing. Lots of people put hearts next to their contacts. The woman was a stranger who shopped at her store and had a toddler and a tired face and a name in her phone that happened to match her father's. She was being paranoid, grief-brained. Her therapist had warned her about this, the way losing her mother young, about losing anyone else she loved. She saw disaster in ordinary coincidences. She read abandonment into unreturned texts. It was something she worked on, something she was always working on. On the 4th day, she went back and watched the store's security footage. She had access. That was the small, quiet fact that made everything possible. She was the shift supervisor. She knew the system, the codes, the camera angles. She told herself she was just going to confirm it was nothing. She was going to watch the footage, see a stranger's name on a stranger's phone, and go home and sleep properly for the first time in 4 nights. She pulled up the timestamp. She watched herself hand the phone back to the woman. She paused the footage and zoomed in on the screen just before the woman's hand covered it. The name was Thomas Marsh. Not just Thomas. Thomas Marsh, with a blue heart. Audrey sat at the back office desk for a long time after that. The store hummed around her. Someone's doing a price check on register 3. The walk-in freezer kicked on with its familiar low groan. She looked at the paused frame on the monitor, and something she had been trying not to think about for 4 days became a thing she could no longer avoid thinking about. Thomas Marsh was not a common name. She started small. That was how she handled difficult things, methodically, quietly, one small piece of information at a time. She remembered what the woman looked like. 40s, she'd guessed. Brown hair with the kind of highlights that had grown out a few inches. She had paid with a credit card. Audrey couldn't access payment information. That would require a T, and explanations she wasn't ready to give. But she could remember the cadence of the name the machine had displayed when the transaction processed. She had glanced at it the way she glanced at every name, out of habit. K. Whitmore. She searched K. Whitmore in Portland on every platform she could think of. It took the better part of an evening, 2 cups of cold coffee and a rabbit hole through a neighborhood Facebook group where someone by that name had posted about a lost cat 7 months ago. The profile photo was small and blurry, but it was her. Brown hair with grown-out highlights. A toddler, the same toddler, sitting in a yard that had a very specific, very unusual wooden garden, the way she used to study case files in her paralegal prep course. The Facebook account listed her as Karen Whitmore. It listed her city as Portland. It listed her relationship status as nothing at all. The toddler's name from a birthday post 2 years back was Theo Whitmore, 2 years old. Audrey sat with that for a long time. She called her father that Sunday. Same as always, he called at 11. She picked up on the second ring, and they talked about ordinary things. Her certification exam coming up, a pipe that had burst in his garage, whether Beverly's sister was going to visit for Thanksgiving. She listened to his voice with a new kind of attention, looking for something. She wasn't sure what. A hesitation, a change of subject, an unfamiliar blankness where warmth should be. She didn't exactly like himself. He asked if she was eating enough vegetables. She said yes. He told her he was proud of her. She said she knew, and she thanked him, and she hung up, and she sat on her balcony with her phone in her lap and looked at the tomato plants and thought about the name Thomas Marsh on a stranger's phone with a small blue heart. She thought about how you could know someone your entire life and still not know all the rooms inside them. She thought about her mother. She went back inside and opened her laptop. It took her 11 days to find the apartment. Not through any illegal means, not through anything dramatic, through the same quiet patience she applied to everything. Karen Whitmore had tagged a coffee shop in a neighborhood Facebook post. She'd mentioned a farmer's market within walking distance. She had once complained about street parking on a specific block name. Audrey was a paralegal student. She was good at research. She was very, very good at building pictures from small pieces. She drove to the neighborhood on a Saturday morning. She sat in her car and drank coffee from a thermos and read a novel she wasn't really reading. She was there for 2 hours before she saw anything. Then the door to a ground-floor apartment opened, and Karen Whitmore stepped out with the toddler, Theo, in a yellow raincoat and small rubber boots. She was followed by a man Audrey had known her entire life, a man whose hands she could still feel on her shoulders from every graduation, every hard day, every time the world had felt like too much. A man who was laughing now at something the toddler had done, crouching down to his level, fixing the hood of his yellow raincoat. Her father, Thomas Marsh. He looked happy, relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in years, maybe not since before her mother died, maybe not even then. He stood and took Karen's hand, and they walked down the sidewalk in the rain, the toddler between them, holding both their hands and swinging forward with each step, his boots hitting a puddle and all three of them laughing. Audrey watched from across the street. She did not get out of the car. She did not move for a long time. She just watched the three of them walk down the block until they turned a corner and were gone. Then she put her car in drive and left. She did not cry until she was back in her apartment, and when she did, it was the kind of crying that doesn't make much sound, the kind that comes from somewhere below the chest, deep and quiet and private. She sat on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub and her face in her hands, and she let it happen, all of it, the shock and the grief, and the strange vertigo of realizing that the ground under her entire childhood was not as solid as she had believed. She gave herself an hour. Then she washed her face. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table and thought very carefully about what she actually knew, and what she needed to find out, and what came next. She called her best friend Nina the following morning. Nina Okafor, who had known Audrey since their first week of college, who had held her hand through the bad years after her mother died, who had a sharp, precise mind and a law degree. She used to work family court. "I need your help with something," Audrey said, "and I need you to let me explain everything before you react," Nina said. She talked. When she was done, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Nina said, "There was a long pause on the other end of the child." "Two," Audrey said. "A boy named Theo." Nina was quiet again for a moment. "Okay, how long have your father and Beverly been married?" 7 years. "So this has been happening for at least 2 years. Possibly longer." "Possibly," Audrey said. "I don't know yet. What do you want to do?" Audrey had thought about this. She had thought about almost nothing else for 2 weeks. "I want to know the truth," she said. "All of it. Before I do anything else." Nina said, "Then let's find out the truth." It was Nina who found the lease. She knew what to look for and where to look. A paralegal student knew the theory, but Nina knew the practice. The apartment on Garfield Street had been leased to Thomas Marsh 14 months ago. Monthly payments, his name on the contract, his signature on the documentation. 14 months. Audrey did the math quietly. Theo was 2 years old, which meant her father had been involved with Karen Whitmore before the apartment, before the lease, long before any of this had a paper trail. Long enough that a child had been born. A child named Theo Whitmore, who walked in yellow rubber boots in the rain and held his father's hand on Saturday mornings. She sat with that number. 2 years old. She'd spent the last 2 Christmases at her father and Beverly's house. She'd eaten Beverly's pie and played cards with Beverly's sons and hugged her father goodbye at the door, and driven back to Portland in the dark and thought she knew the shape of her family. She thought she knew who her father was. She had not known about Theo. She had not known about Karen. She had not known about the apartment on Garfield Street, or the Saturday mornings, or the yellow raincoat. She had not been given the chance to know. That was the part that kept sitting heavily in her chest. Not just the deception of Beverly, though that was real and serious and wrong, but the deception of her, the way he had called every Sunday and asked about her. He was proud of her, while 23 blocks away, he had a toddler son who called him something. Dad, probably. Daddy. The same word Audrey had used her whole life, the word that had belonged entirely to her and now, it turned out, did not. She called her father's cell phone. He picked up on the first ring. "Hey, sweetheart." She had prepared herself for this. She had spent 3 days preparing. "I'm in town," she said. "I'd like to get dinner, just the 2 of us." A tiny pause. He recovered from it immediately. "Of course. I'd love that. How about Thursday?" "Thursday," she said. "I'll pick the place." She picked a restaurant near her apartment. Public, quiet, the kind of place with tablecloths and low lighting where raised voices would attract attention. She chose the corner table. She arrived early. She ordered water and sat with her hands folded and waited. He walked in looking exactly like himself. Silver at the temples now, the same wide smile he'd always had, the same unhurried way he moved through a room. He hugged her at the table. She hugged him back. She noticed she held on a half-second less than usual. They ordered food neither of them ended up eating much of. They talked for a while about ordinary things. She let him lead. She watched his face and listened to him and thought about the yellow raincoat and the puddle and the 3 of them laughing on a sidewalk in the rain. Then she took her phone out of her pocket and set it on the table between them. On the screen was a screenshot. The security footage zoomed in. Karen Whitmore's phone, face up on the conveyor belt. His name with the blue heart. She didn't say anything. She just let him see it. The change in his face was slow, like watching something load. First the confusion, then the recognition, then something she had never seen on her father's face before, internal, a caving behind the eyes that happened in the span of about 4 seconds. His hand came up and pressed against his mouth. "How long have you known?" he asked. 3 weeks, she said, "but I wanted to be sure before I came to you." He looked at the table. She said, "Theo is 2 years old, Dad. I already found the lease. Nina helped me. I know about Karen. I know about all of it." He closed his eyes. She waited. The restaurant was quiet around them. Silverware clinked somewhere across the room. A couple at another table laughed at something. Finally he said, "I didn't know how to stop." She felt something tighten in her chest. "That's not an answer, I know," he said. "You're right, I know," she said. "Beverly doesn't know, it wasn't a question." He shook his head. She said, "You have a son, Theo. He's 2 years old and you have a whole life with him that you never told me about. You call me every Sunday and you ask about my vegetables and you tell me you're proud of me and you have a child I've never met." Her voice stayed even. She had practiced staying even. She had practiced this in the shower and on her commute and while stacking produce at work. She had known that if she let herself stop being even, she would not be able to do this. He said her name. Audrey. Just that. She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had packed her lunches and fixed her bicycle and driven 3 hours in a snowstorm to pick her up from college when she'd had her appendix out at 19. The man who had held her hand at her mother's funeral and not cried until he thought she was asleep. She knew him. She thought she had known him all the way to the bottom. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," she said. "You're an adult." But Beverly is also an adult and she deserves to make her own choices with the full truth, and Karen deserves the same thing. He looked at her. His eyes were red now. "I think you need to talk to both of them," she said. "And I think you need to do it soon, not in 6 months after you figured out what to say. Soon." He nodded once. She folded her napkin and set it on the table. She stood up. "Dad," she said quietly, "I love you. I have loved you my entire life, and I am not going to stop. But I am not going to pretend this didn't happen. I'm not going to carry this for you. That's not my job." She paid for her dinner at the front. She walked to her car in the cold evening air and sat behind the wheel for a while, looking at the street. Then she drove home. He told Beverly 4 days later. Beverly called Audrey that same evening, her voice steady in the way voices get when a person is holding themselves together by the thinnest thread. And she said, "Your father told me everything. I just wanted you to know that I don't blame you. You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," Audrey said. "I'm sorry this happened to you." Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He thinks I'm going to forgive him. He keeps saying we can work through it." "What do you want?" Audrey asked. Another pause. "I want to stop shaking. I want to sleep through a whole night. I don't know yet what comes after that." "That's enough for right now," Audrey said. They stayed on the phone for 22 minutes. They had never talked for 22 minutes before, not in 7 years. Her father called her 41 times in the first week after Beverly asked him to leave. She let most of them go to voicemail. On the 4th day, she listened to all of them in order, and then called him back once. "I'm here," she said. "I'm not going anywhere. But you have to take responsibility for this. All of it. That means Beverly and Karen and Theo and the years of choices you made that led here. I can be your daughter through this. I can't be your excuse," he said. "I know," she said. "Good." He did not call 41 times the following week. She reached out to Karen Whitmore herself 3 weeks after the dinner. Not from anger. Something quieter than that. Something she couldn't fully name. Maybe because she had been in the grocery store parking lot when everything shifted, and Karen had been there too, not knowing she was also standing on ground that was about to move. She texted first. "My name is Audrey Marsh. Thomas is my father. I'm not reaching out to cause you any more pain. I just think we should talk if you're open to it. No pressure." Karen took 4 days to respond. Then, "I didn't know he was married for the first year. When I found out, he told me it was over between them. I believed him for longer than I should have." She paused. Audrey could feel the pause in the message, the space where words had been removed. "Theo asks for him every day." Audrey wrote back, "He's going to have to figure out how to show up for Theo regardless of everything else. I can't make him do that. But I want you to know that I think you deserved better than what you were given. So does your son." Another long pause. Then, "They didn't become friends. Not then. Not the way the story might have neatly resolved if this were a different kind of story. But they were 2 women who had been handed the same incomplete version of the same man, and they were not enemies. That felt like something. It felt like the right shape for things. The months that followed were not simple. Her father entered therapy, not because he wanted to, but because Audrey made clear that her willingness to maintain a relationship with him depended on it. Beverly filed for divorce. She moved into her sister's house in Columbus and sent Audrey a Christmas card that said simply, "You were the best part of that family. I mean that." The handwriting was small and careful, and it made Audrey press the card flat against her chest for a long moment before she set it on her windowsill. Thomas Marsh was formally established as Theo's father. He moved into a smaller apartment. He called Audrey every Sunday, still, and she answered sometimes. The calls were shorter now, and there was a different quality to them. Less comfortable, more honest. She thought that was probably better, even though it was harder. She passed her paralegal certification exam on a Tuesday in March in a room with 40 other people, and she sat in her car afterward in the parking garage and called Nina. "I passed," she said. Nina screamed loud enough that Audrey had to hold the phone away from her ear. Then she said, "I always knew you would. And you need to celebrate properly. And I'm coming to Portland in 2 weeks, and you cannot argue with me about this." Audrey laughed. She hadn't laughed like that in a while. It surprised her. Nina did come, 2 weeks later, and they went to a restaurant with excellent cocktails and sat at a table by the window with the rain coming down outside and talked for hours about everything and nothing. And at some point Nina said, "How are you actually doing?" Not Case Cybery doing, actually. Audrey thought about it, honestly. "I think I'm okay," she said. "I think I went into this expecting it to break something in me permanently, and it didn't. It changed something, but it didn't break it." Nina nodded slowly. "Do you still trust him?" "A little less than before," Audrey said. "Maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe I trusted him in a way that wasn't quite real. Like I needed him to be a certain thing so much that I didn't let myself see the parts that weren't." Nina looked at her. "That's very grown-up of you." Audrey smiled. "I've been practicing." She met someone in the fall, not dramatically. Not the way she had always half-imagined meeting someone. Some collision, some spark, some moment she would be able to point to later and say, "That was it." It was slower than that and more ordinary. His name was Joel Reyes. He was a contractor who had come in to retile the floor behind the deli counter in September and had asked, with a complete lack of self-consciousness, whether the store carried a particular brand of sparkling water that his doctor had told him to drink more of. She had walked him to the correct aisle without thinking about it. He had thanked her. He came back the next day, and she happened to be nearby, and he said, "I have to tell you, the sparkling water is awful. I don't know how anyone drinks this voluntarily." She laughed. He smiled. He came back twice more that week, and each time found a small, genuine reason to talk to her. Nothing pushy, nothing that required her to respond in any particular way. On the fourth visit, he said, "I would like to take you to coffee sometime. If you're open to it, no pressure." She thought, very briefly, about the last year. The phone on the conveyor belt, the security footage, the drive to Garfield Street in the rain, everything that had made her slower and more careful and more honest about what she actually wanted. She looked at Joel Reyes. He had the kind of face that didn't work hard to be liked. He just looked at her the way a person looks at someone they are genuinely curious about. "Yes," she said, "I'm open to it." He was unhurried in all the ways that mattered. He showed up to things he had agreed to attend. He remembered small details. That she preferred tea to coffee, that she hated overhead lighting, that she was almost done with her certification, and that it meant something real to her. He did not perform these remembrances. He simply retained them, the way you retain things that matter. On their fifth date, she told him about her father. Not everything, not the whole unspooling mess of it, but enough. He listened without filling the silences. When she finished, he said, "That sounds like it was really hard. And also, like you handled it with more integrity than most people would." She thought about that for a moment. "I don't know if that's true," she said. He said, "I think it is. Most people either cut and run or cover it up. You stayed in it and told the truth." She looked at him. She thought about the conveyor belt, the zoom in on the security footage, the dinner at the corner table with the tablecloth, and the screenshot on her phone. All the small, careful steps she had taken through a situation she had not chosen. "Maybe," she said. He took her hand across the table, not dramatically. Just reached across and put his hand over hers, and she let him, and they sat like that for a while. Her father met Theo for the first formal visit in October. He called Audrey afterward, and his voice on the phone was different, quieter, thinner, like something had been wrung out of him and replaced with something rawer and less certain. "He's funny," Thomas said. "He's so funny, Audrey. He has this way of looking at things like he's figuring out how they work." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "That's what you said about me when I was little. You used to say I looked at things like I was taking them apart." A long silence. "Yeah," he said. I know, she let the silence sit there between them. She wasn't angry. She was something more complicated than angry. Something that had no clean name. A feeling made of grief and love, and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from holding the full, contradictory weight of another human being's failures and gifts at the same time. He's your son, she finally said. He needs you to show up for him, not just when it's convenient. Not just on the good days. I know, Thomas said. I'm trying to learn how to do that. That's all any of us can do, she said. She meant it. She was learning the same thing in different rooms for different reasons. On a quiet Sunday morning the following spring, Audrey Marsh stood in her apartment with a letter in her hand. An offer of employment from a small family law firm downtown, entry level. Not glamorous. The kind of job where you did the careful, unglamorous work of helping people navigate the hardest passages of their lives. Divorces, custody agreements, the legal machinery that has to turn even when everything human has stopped making sense. She had applied for it 3 months ago and half forgotten about it. Now it was here. She set the letter on the kitchen table. She went to her balcony and looked out at the city, the way it stretched and hummed below her, still wet from the night's rain. She thought about the woman she had been before a phone, slid off a conveyor belt and changed the direction of everything. She thought about how she had believed, in some deep, unexamined way, that stability meant the absence of disruption, that a life well built would stay built. She knew now that it didn't work that way. She knew that solid things cracked, that people you loved carried rooms inside them you'd never been invited into, that the ground could shift under any version of your life without warning. She also knew that she had walked through a year of shifting ground, and she had not lied, and she had not run, and she had not let the worst of what she'd found make her worse. She had told the truth even when it cost her. She had stayed in rooms that were hard to be in. She had kept her hands steady when everything in her wanted to throw something. She went back inside and picked up the letter. She called Nina first. Nina answered before the first ring had even fully sounded and said, "Well?" Audrey looked at the letter. She looked at the tomato plants on the balcony, just beginning their slow climb toward the railing. She thought about her mother, briefly, the way she still did, less like grief now and more like weather, something that moved through her and left. "I'm going to take it," she said. Nina made a sound that was not quite a word. It didn't need to be. Outside, Portland was doing what Portland always did in spring, raining softly and quietly, getting on with things, indifferent to who was watching and beautiful anyway. Audrey stood at her window for one more moment and let herself feel the full weight of where she had been and where she was now. Then she picked up a pen and signed her name.